Hi, everyone. So earlier today, OpenAI announced the ChatGPT API. I thought we'd take a quick look at what they announced and some interesting points about what they announced, and then also have a look at how you can implement this in code with just the OpenAI package by itself, and then also with LangChain as well. So they've announced the API, and amazingly, it's available straight away today, which is fantastic. They also announced some interesting things about Whisper, which I might cover in a different video. But they gave some nice examples of customers who are using the ChatGPT API, starting to build apps with it. There's some interesting things in the actual blog post here. And this is really going into sort of what the model is and a little bit about it. So one of the key things is that the model is actually 10 times cheaper than the previous GPT 3.5 models. So that is fantastic, right? It suddenly means that a lot of things that were going to be too expensive to do with the OpenAI APIs now suddenly become much more interesting to do. You can now use a lot more tokens and do multiple calls to the API to be able to put something together, which you can give back to a user. So the pricing is definitely one of the big things. You can see they've also called this new API the GPT 3.5 Turbo API, and it lives up to its name. So far in testing, I'm finding that it's much faster than the previous API and the TextDaVinci 003. And it's able to process things much better, and probably the quality is much better there as well. One of the other interesting things that they announced along with this was this whole idea of the chat markup language. So this is just, let's just jump in here. They've basically made available some of the internal token systems that the model uses. So many of the large language models that are transformers have what they call special tokens. The most common ones just being like a start token and an end token, but a lot of them use tokens for different things. So you have things like the Markup model, which has tokens for context, for questions, for answers. And they're kind of going down an interesting direction with this. But because this is all built for chat, what they're actually doing is they're making these sort of tokens represent either the assistant, either their side of the API, or your user, or a system. So you can see here, when this is a simplified way of passing it in, that basically you have the role is system, and this is where you're passing in the context, the backstory of the actual bot to help it guide on every answer that it's going to give. Then you've got your user input, in this case, a question, and then you've got the assistant sending the information back. So this is quite a nice way of doing it that allows us to control. And they do mention that in future models, they're planning to use these sort of tokens more going forward to allow you to steer where the model is going. So it's definitely an interesting thing to get looking at now. You'll see that also the response that you're going to get back is quite similar to before. We've got a few different things. One of the big things is that now the actual API endpoint has changed. So let's have a look at that when we jump into some code. They mentioned that instructing these chat models is basically the same as previously, that you can play around with that, but that may change it in the future. They also mentioned some nice, interesting stuff about chat versus completion. So that this model is set up to do chat, but it can also do completion tasks. So chat tasks is basically a question and answer, or a call response kind of thing going on. But the completion task is maybe where you start giving it something and then you want it to just generate a bunch of content for you. And they point out that they give you some sort of tips on how to do that with the tokens for this. So basically just defining the context of what you're doing in the tokens and then passing things. Unfortunately, as of now, we can't fine tune this model. So hopefully that will come in the future. Another interesting thing was that recently there was a leak about some of the things that were coming for ChatGPT API and possibly the GPT-4 API. And we can see that this is from last week. We can see that certainly the first part is held true, right? That the GPT 3.5 Turbo is this. Unfortunately, the size of the span of tokens is still just 4,096. So we haven't gotten the models yet that have the 8,000 span token or the 32,000 span token. They are probably on the way in the near future. Anyway, let's jump into the code and let's have a look at how you can implement this. Okay, so here I've got my notebook. And what I'm going to be doing is just walking through basically how you use the new ChatGPT API with the standard OpenAI library and then with LangChain. So I've gone through, I've set up my keys, I've actually already run that cell. And now the first one we're going to look at is just a really simple completion. So here we've got a couple of things that we're going to put in. So the start is, rather than the OpenAI.completion endpoint, we're using the OpenAI chat completion endpoint. So this is how you set that up with the OpenAI SDK directly. We need to tell it the model that we're using, and then we need to pass in this new sort of token system of messages. So you can see here, the first one we've got is basically we're setting up the role. The system, again, is where I talked about earlier in the video, of where we define what the overall context of the bot is going to be. So here I'm just putting your helpful assistant. And the next thing that we want to do is we pass in some user input here. So if we just run this, right, you'll see that, okay, sure enough, we've got our response. We can look at the response back that we're getting, and we can see that the answer that we got back was to, hello, what kind of assistant are you? I'm a virtual assistant equipped with AI technology to assist you with various tasks and answer your question as best as I can. How may I assist you today? And the role that it passed back was the assistant too. So we would need to take this and feed this into the messages as we're going to do this. We can also see that we've got some nice information about the token, number of tokens used, etc. So this whole sort of chat markup language is going to become more prominent over time, it seems. So this is the token system that's actually going into the language model. But to get this kind of thing, this is from their documentation, we're basically just going to run it in as messages like this. So here you can see I'm going to just set up my special tokens with their actual content that relates to them. And I'm just going to set up a simple while loop here of where we're going to have an input. And let me just go through the code while this is running. We're going to have an input. As long as if the user types out exit, we will get the total number of tokens used for the conversation and print that out and then break out of this loop. Otherwise, we're going to basically just add whatever the user said here. And then we're going to keep adding the user's response, their reply, and then what it is that we're talking about. So if I come in here and just say, let's get some question. So when was Marcus Aurelius emperor of Rome? You can see here that because we basically defined up here that you're a helpful assistant named Kate, so it actually introduces itself in this case. Hello, I'm Kate. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius ruled from 161 to his death in 180 AD. And it gives a little bit more information in there. We also then are printing out the total tokens that were used up to this part. So now if we go in and we put in something like, who was his wife, we can see that, okay, now we're using a lot more tokens, right? Because now we're feeding this messages part is now getting a lot longer. It's got the first part and the second part in here. So we've got our full sort of context is getting a lot bigger there. Okay, so we can see that it's giving us information about the children. And we can see now that our tokens are actually quite up there for this particular call, not for the entire call. So if we look at the entire calls, so if we exit out of this, we're going to see that we used 540 tokens in that small conversation. So you can see that it's great that it's 10 times cheaper than before, but you still can run up a lot of tokens if someone just sits there chatting away with it. The next thing is using it with LangChain. So the LangChain implementation, I think, is amazingly fast. That the guys have done this so quickly. In a matter of hours, they already had some basic stuff going. I thought I'd just show you just some simple things in here. So the version of LangChain I'm using is a release candidate. So my guess is that within 24 hours, they will have a new version out for this. But you can see here that, okay, I'm basically bringing in, so we've got these messages just like we had before, which are going to go at the front of the prompt. The thing that we've got a little bit different. So in the past, we would only just bring in OpenAI, and now we're bringing in OpenAI chat. And you'll see that if we, and in the past, we would basically define the model as OpenAI. We might pass in the DaVinci, pass in temperature, etc. The new one, we're defining the model. We're also passing in these prefix messages that are in there. So now I've basically got this going. So it's going to be basically take the following user input, answer it in a informative and interesting but concise way for someone who is new to the topic. right? So this is just setting up our prompt template, which is standard stuff for LangChain. And then now we can basically use this in here. So we can see that we can pass in now, when was Marcus Aurelius emperor of Rome? You can see that this time, because our messaging and stuff like that, we made it a little bit more formal, that you're a history professor named Kate, and we've defined a lot more now of the context that's going on in here. So it's able to now give us an answer here, Emperor, and it gives us a little bit more information as if it was a history professor trying to tell us things about him. And in the next one, it's very interesting that, okay, we can do the same question. Again, we're getting longer answers this time back. Another thing, though, that we should realize is that we haven't actually persisted any state. In each one of these is an individual call to the language model. So we would have to look at using the memory module in LangChain to be able to constantly pass something back into it, like we did with the example up here. And I imagine you'll see that in LangChain over the next day or two. So anyway, this was a short video just to show you what some of the cool things that have come out with the new ChatGPT API, and to show you how you can use it both in just the normal OpenAI package and in the LangChain package as well.